Have you ever trusted someone wholeheartedly, only to be shattered by betrayal? What if those you called friends became the very hands that pulled you into despair? This is a story of revenge, redemption, and the haunting scars that remain when friendship turns to betrayal. Join us on a journey where loyalty is tested, identities are shed, and justice is sought in the darkest corners. Subscribe to our channel for stories that unravel the complex ties of trust and betrayal. And follow us to see what lies beyond vengeance. The world was always simple for Ethan Gray. In his mechanic shop's worn-down yet welcoming space, he found fulfillment in every wrench he tightened and every engine he revived. A humble man by choice, Ethan took pride in simple things: the smell of fresh oil, the satisfying clang of metal on metal, and the warm smiles of returning customers in his modest Philadelphia neighborhood. Here, his life felt as solid as the steel he worked with, and nothing seemed capable of breaking it. Ethan had grown up among people who valued integrity and hard work. His father, also a mechanic, had instilled in him these very principles. Their shop wasn't just a place to fix cars. It was a sanctuary where loyalty and honesty were sacred. Ethan carried his father's memory in every job, each repair a tribute to the man who had taught him that a strong character was worth more than a full pocket. Ethan believed he had everything he needed: good work, cherished memories, and the quiet promise of a future with Melissa, his girlfriend of 3 years. Melissa was a beacon in his life, a gentle presence who brought warmth to his routine days. She worked as a waitress in a nearby cafe and smiled, brightening the entire shop when she stopped by with coffee for him. With Melissa, Ethan had felt a steady and true love that he thought would carry him into a peaceful future filled with shared dreams and simple joys. But Ethan wasn't alone. Since childhood, he bonded with 2 close friends: Liam, the ever-charismatic dreamer, and Daniel, the quiet and rational confidant. They weren't just friends. They were like brothers who had grown up facing life's challenges together, always with a promise of loyalty. In the evenings, the shop would often echo with their laughter and voices as they shared beers and talked about life's possibilities. Despite the occasional differences, the 3 of them remained inseparable, a circle unbroken by the passage of time. Yet, subtle changes had begun creeping into Ethan's life. Liam, always ambitious, seemed lately consumed by an insatiable hunger for more, a bigger life. Faster money, a grander legacy. His eyes gleamed with a new intensity as he spoke of lucrative opportunities, quick cash, and a future where their lives would be unrecognizably affluent. Though Daniel usually remained grounded, Ethan noticed a shadow of complicity in his gaze, a willingness to follow wherever Liam led. Ethan brushed it off as one of Liam's passing fancies. But in truth, it was a storm brewing on the horizon that Ethan could feel even if he couldn't see it. Without realizing it, Ethan was about to become a pawn in a scheme darker than he could have imagined. His friends, the men he'd trusted more than family, were preparing to betray him in ways that would leave scars deeper than any physical wound. At the heart of this deception was Melissa's father, Max, a man of influence and power who held sway in places most dared not tread. Ethan doesn't know that Liam's desire for wealth and Max's ruthless ambition will soon align in a plot that will consume Ethan's peaceful life, setting off a chain of events from which there will be no return. As he unknowingly teetered on the edge of ruin, Ethan's world would change forever, leaving him to rise from the ashes or be lost to them. Days turned to weeks, and Ethan's quiet life continued. Though his instincts whispered something was amiss, he noticed the subtle ways in which Liam's presence felt different. Each time Liam entered the shop, his gaze would linger on the walls, worn-down furniture, and the rustic machinery with a look bordering on disdain. "We could be so much more than this, Ethan," he would say, his voice edging impatiently. "Just imagine if we expanded and took risks. We wouldn't have to work day and night in this dusty old place." Ethan listened in silence, nodding politely as his friend spoke. He couldn't shake the feeling that Liam's words hinted at something darker. This modest shop was more than a business for Ethan. It was his father's legacy, a place where he found purpose and peace. Yet Liam's voice grew louder and more insistent, his dreams of grandeur intruding into the simplicity that Ethan cherished. Daniel, too, began to seem distant, his quiet demeanor now accompanied by an unsettling nervousness. Though he usually mirrored Ethan's steady outlook on life, his gaze now shifted uneasily when conversations veered toward money and ambition. Once a place of warmth and familiarity, the shop now felt tense and heavy, like the stillness before a storm. Ethan couldn't explain it, but a cold unease had settled in his bones, making him feel like an outsider in his own life. Yet, out of loyalty, he dismissed his worries. He had no reason to doubt the friends he had known since childhood, or so he believed. It was a rainy night when the world Ethan knew would crumble. He had stayed late at the shop, focused on a complicated repair, the rhythmic clinking of tools the only sound to break the silence. The rain tapped against the metal roof, filling the space with a calming ambience, soothing him in ways that nothing else could. In that moment of stillness, under the dim glow of a single hanging light bulb, his phone buzzed. "Ethan, can you come to the cafe? I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Melissa's voice trembled, and a chill prickled down his spine. The fear in her tone was unfamiliar, a sound he had never associated with her gentle warmth. Without hesitation, Ethan left the shop, tools abandoned, and went to the cafe where Melissa worked. The city streets were dark, the rain casting reflections off the slick pavement as he hurried through alleys and empty sidewalks. When he reached the cafe, he found Melissa seated in the far corner, her eyes downcast, fingers trembling as they held a cup of untouched coffee. "What's wrong?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her, his heart pounding as he tried to read the emotions on her face. Melissa took a shaky breath before meeting his gaze. "There's something I've been hiding, Ethan, something I wish I could have told you sooner." Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she struggled to continue. "My father, Max, he's been pressuring me. He's gotten into something dangerous and involved with Liam and Daniel. They're planning a robbery, Ethan, and they want to frame you." Ethan's heart stopped. He felt the world had tilted, the ground beneath him giving way as the words sank in. "What? Melissa, that can't be true. They're my friends. They wouldn't do something like that," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Melissa's hand reached across the table, gripping his own. "I know, Ethan, but it's happening. They're going to use you as the scapegoat. If you don't act fast, everything you've worked for will be destroyed." She looked down, her shoulders shaking as guilt weighed heavily on her. "My father, he's threatened me. He said if I don't help them set you up, he'll destroy my sister. I can't lose her. Ethan, I'm so sorry." The cafe seemed to close around Ethan, the walls suffocating as her words hit him like hammers. His friends, the men he'd trusted above all else, were planning to ruin him, to rob him not only of his shop and livelihood, but of his very freedom. Betrayal surged through his veins like ice, and he felt a numbness seep into his bones. The rain continued to pour outside, casting a muted light through the windows, each drop a hollow echo of his shattered trust. Before he could fully process the horror, red and blue lights flashed through the windows, and the sound of sirens filled the air. The cafe door swung open, and several officers entered, their eyes scanning the room until they found him. "Ethan Gray," one of them announced, cold and unyielding. "You're under arrest for a casino robbery earlier tonight." Ethan barely registered the sensation of cold handcuffs tightening around his wrists. His gaze drifted to Melissa, who looked away, her face pale and full of guilt, as they led him out into the rain-soaked streets. Ethan's mind swirled with disbelief and pain. He had lost everything in a single night at shop, friends, and love. But as the rain soaked him to the bone, a new feeling began to take root. A cold and consuming anger that promised he would return someday to claim the justice he was now denied. Ethan sat alone in his prison cell, the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. He clutched his knees to his chest, trying to contain the anger and betrayal. The walls around him were cold, gray, and unforgiving, mirroring the emptiness he felt within. He had trusted them, Liam, Daniel, and Melissa, and now that trust had turned into a poison, slowly eating away at his soul. The days blurred into weeks, and the weight of isolation settled over him like a shroud. He questioned every moment he'd shared with his friends, every smile and handshake, wondering if it had all been a lie. The despair threatened to crush him. But something fierce began to emerge within that darkness. He couldn't allow himself to break. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He resolved to survive, not because he had anything left to live for, but because he needed the chance to confront those who had torn his life apart one day. But prison was an unforgiving place. The other inmates sensed his vulnerability, viewing him as an easy target. His first encounter with the violence of prison life left him bruised and bleeding, his spirit hanging by a thread. During one of these moments of hopelessness, he met Don Vicente, an older man with a presence so commanding that even the fiercest inmates respected him. Don Vicente saw something in Ethan, perhaps a reflection of a younger self, and took him under his wing. "Here," Don Vicente said, handing Ethan a worn book on strategy. "You'll need more than strength to survive this place. Control your mind, focus your anger, and keep your wits about you. Revenge is a game of patience, not rage." Under Don Vicente's guidance, Ethan learned the art of composure, concealing his emotions, and biding his time. He became a shadow, observing everything around him, storing every lesson he learned, every skill he acquired. Day by day, he let go of the pain that had consumed him, replacing it with a steely resolve. He began to see his time in prison not as punishment, but as preparation, a chance to build himself anew, stronger and more resilient. The man who had once been Ethan Gray was no more. In his place, a new identity emerged, a man tempered by betrayal, honed by anger, and guided by the ruthless wisdom of Don Vicente. He chose a new name that would ensure his past remained buried when he eventually returned to the world outside. It would be John Carter, a man no one would recognize, a ghost with no past and only one mission: to make those who had betrayed him pay. Years later, the prison gates finally opened, releasing John Carter. The sunlight felt strange against his skin, almost foreign, as though he had been in darkness for too long ever to feel warmth again. The bustling streets of Philadelphia stretched out before him, filled with people who had no idea of the life he had endured or the storm brewing within him. But he was no longer the Ethan they had known. Every scar on his body, every painful memory etched into his mind, had forged him into someone unrecognizable, a man with a new face, a new purpose, and a soul as cold and unyielding as steel. With the connections he had made through Don Vicente, John could secure a new identity and life that granted him the freedom to operate in shadows, gather resources, and build a network that would enable his plans. He took a small apartment on the city's outskirts, far from the neighborhood he once called home. Every day, he observed, calculated, and studied his old friends from afar. Liam's face, once familiar, now sparked a cold fury within him. He watched as Liam rose in status, now a man of influence thanks to the stolen wealth they had framed him for. But John was patient. Revenge, as Don Vicente had taught him, was best served cold. He began inserting himself into circles that would bring him closer to Liam and Daniel, always keeping his true intentions hidden. And Melissa, her betrayal cut most profound of all. Though she had claimed her father forced her hand, John couldn't forgive the way she had looked away as the police took him. He knew he would have to confront her as well, to lay bare the pain she had caused him. As he stood in the shadows of his new life, John vowed to bring his former friends to their knees, just as they had done to him. But he wouldn't rush. He would move as silently and steadily as he had learned in prison, striking only when they least expected it. The city was his arena now, and the betrayal they had sown would come back to haunt them with a ferocity they could never have anticipated. Philadelphia, a city filled with history and grandeur, now held only memories of pain and betrayal for John. The crowded streets, the towering buildings that cast long shadows, and the dim lights of the evening all felt different to him. He was a stranger in his city, a ghost moving through its dark corners with a calculated purpose. Here, amid the oblivious crowds, he planned to strike at those who had torn his life apart. John's first step was to enter the circles where Liam and Daniel moved, blending into a world of ambition and wealth that he had once considered meaningless. But now, he found himself captivated by the power it offered him, a power he could wield to dismantle those who had betrayed him. Through contacts made in prison and some old favors from his mentor, Don Vicente, John acquired a low-profile position in a financial firm where Liam often invested. It was a strategic entry to get close to Liam without revealing his true intentions. In the months that followed, John observed Liam from a distance. He watched as Liam boasted at social gatherings, his laughter echoing through dimly lit rooms filled with the scent of expensive cologne and cigars. Liam was no longer the street-smart friend John once knew. He had transformed into an entitled, arrogant man who flaunted his wealth without regard for the lives he had destroyed to acquire it. Each time Liam smiled and spoke of his success, it fueled John's resolve, reinforcing his purpose. By slowly making himself indispensable to Liam's financial dealings, John entered private meetings, sitting at the same table as his former friend. He maintained a composed exterior, his face void of any expression that might hint at his true feelings. But inside, he harbored a fierce, cold anger, a fire that burned each time he looked at the man who had set him up. The deception was began Oz, satisfied to know he could move through Liam's world without suspicion. The night was thick with fog as John left one of the opulent dinners Liam had hosted, the taste of betrayal lingering as bitterly as the wine they had shared. His eyes scanned the crowded room, settling on Daniel, who remained near the doorway, looking more hesitant than the other guests. Though Daniel now wore fine suits and spoke with polished confidence, John could sense the unease beneath his surface. The man who had once been his brother in loyalty was now a pawn, drawn into Liam's world of deceit and half-truths. John decided it was time to test the boundaries of Daniel's loyalty. That evening, he followed Daniel out of the event, catching up to him just as he entered a small, dimly lit bar around the corner. The bar was shadowy and quiet, where conversations were as muted as the lighting. John sat beside Daniel, careful to keep his tone casual as he introduced himself under his new identity, hiding the knowing look he felt pressing at the corners of his mind. Over drinks, he pushed subtly, weaving questions that hinted at shared pasts and possible regrets, waiting for the telltale signs of guilt in Daniel's eyes. And there it was, a flicker of hesitation, a trace of discomfort as Daniel answered his probing questions. Daniel's facade cracked with each sip, revealing glimpses of the doubt and fear that simmered beneath his confident exterior. John's heart clenched, but he kept his voice even, speaking as a stranger, testing the waters. He could see that Daniel's conscience was far from clear, that his guilt had not faded over the years. That flicker of hesitation was all John needed. He had found the first weakness, a crack in the foundation he would exploit later. For now, though, he left Daniel in turmoil, planting the seeds of doubt that would grow in the dark. One rainy afternoon, John was on a quiet street lined with trees and whispers of old memories. He stopped before a grand estate on the city's outskirts, its gated entry looming tall and formidable. This was Melissa's world now, a life of solitude and luxury paid for with lies and betrayal. As he stood there, the bitterness of the past washed over him, the memory of her tear-streaked face as he was taken away, her silence, her cowardice. She hadn't fought for him. Instead, she had sided with her father's cruel intentions, selling her loyalty for her sister's safety. Through carefully orchestrated encounters, John began to weave his way into Melissa's life. He used an alias, a new face that neither she nor her father could recognize. Donning the role of a business investor, he feigned interest in her art exhibitions and philanthropic endeavors, all while studying her every move. He noticed her eyes, once bright with hope and warmth, now looked hollow and distant. It was clear that time hadn't been kind to her, and the weight of her choices bore down on her like a shroud. Each interaction was carefully measured, each word a subtle reminder of the past she was trying to forget. When they walked through an art gallery together one evening, John pointed at a painting that depicted betrayal, a man surrounded by shadows. His face twisted in pain. "It's fascinating how betrayal can change someone," he mused, his voice quiet yet penetrating. "It stays with you, shapes you, whether you want it to or not." Melissa's eyes lingered on the painting, and for a moment, her gaze softened. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with a sadness that hinted at the weight of her guilt. John saw her expression shift, the shadows of her past flickering in her gaze. And he knew the torment of betrayal hadn't left her untouched. But sympathy was a luxury John couldn't afford. Not now. Her pain was a consequence she would have to bear, one he would ensure she fully confronted. In the following weeks, John's plan unfolded with meticulous precision. He maneuvered his way deeper into Liam's business dealings, subtly influencing decisions and planting ideas that would lead Liam to take increasingly risky ventures. As each small victory fueled Liam's overconfidence, John found satisfaction in knowing he was inching his betrayer closer to ruin. Meanwhile, Daniel's paranoia grew. The bar meetings with John had become routine, each conversation a carefully orchestrated dance around the truth. John would ask about past regrets, his tone soft but probing, and each time, he could see Daniel flinch, the weight of hidden sins gnawing away at him. Shadows formed under Daniel's eyes, and his hands began to tremble slightly whenever they spoke of loyalty and trust. He was slowly unraveling, and John felt a cold satisfaction in watching him break. Then there was Melissa. Her guard was lowering, her trust in him growing. She often confided in John about her regrets and the choices she wished she could undo. "Sometimes, I feel as if I'm living someone else's life," she confessed during a late-night walk through a silent garden. "The things I've done, they haunt me." John, his face veiled in darkness, kept his voice steady. "We all have ghosts." "Melissa," he replied, his words laced with a hidden bitterness. "Sometimes, the only way to quiet them is to face them head-on." As Melissa's guilt grew, John also felt the trap tightening around her. She was nearing her breaking point, where her remorse would consume her entirely. And when that moment came, he would be there to confront her, to finally reveal himself as the man she had once claimed to love. As he walked the darkened streets back to his apartment that night, John felt an odd calm settle over him. His plan was moving forward, each piece aligning perfectly, each betrayal about to be exposed. He would not rush. He would watch as they squirmed, as the guilt and fear took hold of them, as each lie they had told came crashing down around them. Philadelphia's skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent to the storms of betrayal and vengeance brewing beneath its lights. John gazed out at the city, his heart hardened, his resolve sharper than ever. Soon, they would know the depths of the pain they had caused, and there would be no escaping the reckoning that awaited them. They had destroyed his life once, but now he held their fate in his hands, and he would ensure they paid the price for every stolen day, every lie, and every tear shed in his name. As winter settled over Philadelphia, casting a blanket of cold over the city, John's strategy against Liam began to take effect. He had carefully manipulated Liam's finances, suggesting high-risk investments disguised as profitable ventures. With each success, Liam's confidence swelled, closing his eyes to the lurking pitfalls John had meticulously orchestrated. One evening, as a harsh wind blew across the city, Liam hosted a celebratory dinner at his penthouse. The space was a monument to excess: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the cityscape. Guests in designer attire filled the room, each with a glass of champagne, toasting Liam's apparent success. John moved through the crowd, his face a mask of polite detachment, his eyes never leaving Liam. Liam's laughter echoed, loud and arrogant, oblivious to the carefully laid trap tightening around him. He was in his element, relishing the attention, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his empire. As John observed him from a distance, a cold satisfaction settled within. Liam had taken everything from him in the past, and now he was being led, step by step, toward ruin. The moment would come soon, and John would watch his former friend's arrogance shattered, leaving him broken and humiliated. Until then, he waited patiently, his presence a shadow in Liam's world. Late one night, in a small, dimly lit diner far from the lavish surroundings of his usual haunts, Daniel sat across from John, his hands trembling slightly. The usual bustling sounds of the restaurant, clinking silverware, the hum of coffee machines, and quiet conversations seemed distant. Daniel's face was etched with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. As they sipped their coffee, John watched Daniel struggle with his conscience. Each probing question John asked was designed to draw out Daniel's guilt and force him to confront his choices. "Tell me, Daniel," John murmured, his tone gentle yet relentless. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if things had gone differently?" Daniel's face darkened, and he looked down at his coffee. "Every day," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I see him. I see the way we left him. I can't escape it, no matter what I do." His voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes filling with regret and fear. "I didn't want it to happen the way it did. But Liam made it sound so easy, so harmless." John nodded, concealing the storm of emotions swirling within him. He could see Daniel's inner struggle, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him like a vice. Each word Daniel spoke confirmed his weakness, his willingness to abandon a friend for the allure of easy wealth. But John didn't yet reveal his true identity. He let Daniel drown in his guilt, knowing that the revelation would come later when the time was right. Snow had begun to fall over Philadelphia, blanketing the city in a serene, quiet layer of white. John arranged to meet Melissa in a secluded corner of her father's estate, an ornate garden adorned with intricate sculptures and winding paths now dusted with snow. The silence of the winter night enveloped them, the cold air filling his lungs as he observed her. Melissa's face was pale, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. She seemed weighed down by something unseen, a heavy burden that had only grown with each passing day. As they walked through the garden, she finally spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. "There are things I wish I could change," she confessed, barely holding back tears. I wish I could return and stand up to my father, Liam, but it's too late." John's expression remained impassive, though a flicker of anger simmered beneath. Her remorse seemed genuine, but the memory of her betrayal, her silence as he was taken away, still cut deep. "Sometimes," he replied softly, his voice cold, "we make choices that define who we are, choices we can't take back, no matter how much we wish otherwise." Melissa's face crumpled, her shoulders shaking as tears spilled over her cheeks. "I know I failed you," she whispered, a voice filled with sorrow that seemed to echo in the garden's stillness. "I failed myself. My father forced me into a corner, but that doesn't make it right." John looked at her, his face a mask of indifference, though his mind seethed with conflicting emotions. He had once loved her, trusted her, and now, seeing her reduced to this broken shell, he felt an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. He would confront her fully in time, but for now, he let her confession hang in the frozen air, a testament to her guilt and his unyielding resolve. The day of reckoning, he arrived on a gray, foreboding afternoon. John had arranged a meeting with Liam, Daniel, and Melissa at a once familiar place, the old mechanic shop, now abandoned and shrouded in dust and shadows. It was a relic of the life he had once known, symbolizing their shattered innocence and trust. As the three arrived, confusion and unease were evident in their expressions. Liam's usual confidence had faltered, his face clouded with suspicion. Daniel, visibly shaken, kept glancing around as though the walls might close in on him. Melissa, pale and trembling, clutched her coat tightly, her eyes reflecting the pain she could no longer hide. John stepped out of the shadows, his face calm yet intense, his eyes dark with the weight of years of suffering and betrayal. He looked at each of them, taking in the expressions of shock and horror as recognition dawned on their faces. "John!" Melissa gasped, her voice breaking as she stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. Liam's face twisted in denial, while Daniel's eyes filled with a terror that left him rooted in place. "Yes," John replied, his voice quiet yet cutting. "The man you left for dead, the friend you betrayed for your gain. I'm here to make sure you understand the pain you caused, the lives you destroyed." Still clinging to his arrogance, Liam sneered though his voice wavered. You can't blame us, John. It was just business survival. You were weak, always content with scraps. We did what we had to." A surge of anger flared within John, but he held himself back. "Weak," he echoed, his tone filled with a cold fury. "The only weakness here was your greed, your cowardice." He turned to Daniel, who was shaking, his face pale. "And you, Daniel, you let yourself be led, abandoned every principle we once shared for a taste of wealth." Daniel fell to his knees, his voice choked with sobs. "I'm sorry, John. I should have fought back. I should have said no. But John silenced him with a sharp gesture. He looked at Melissa, whose tear-filled eyes met his with a despair he had never seen before. "And you, Melissa," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight of unimaginable pain. "I trusted you more than anyone. I believed in us, in the love we shared. But you turned away. You let them take me without a word." Melissa sobbed openly, her face a mask of regret and self-loathing. "I was weak. I was scared of my father, of what he'd do to me and my sister. But that doesn't make it right. I'm so sorry. John, I'm so sorry." The silence that followed was heavy and spoke of years of betrayal and unspoken regrets. Finally, calm but edged with a lifetime of bitterness, John's voice filled the room. "I didn't come here to forgive you," he stated, his eyes cold. "I came here to make sure you remember what you did, to ensure that the betrayal you dealt to me stays with you until the end." He turned his back on them one by one, leaving them in the hollow remains of what had once been his sanctuary, now tarnished by their betrayal. He walked out of the shop, the weight of revenge leaving him strangely empty yet free. Behind him, he left the echoes of their guilt and fear, a burden they would carry alone. As he stepped into the cold, gray afternoon, John felt the release he had long sought. Once destroyed by betrayal, his life now felt like his own again. The city stretched before him, vast and unyielding, yet filled with the promise of a future untainted by the shadows of his past. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he was free to forge a new path, unbound by hatred, liberated by the knowledge that he had reclaimed his own life.